This is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And my name is PatZi, and I am so happy today to welcome. I am now in Texas. I'm in Austin, and my goodness, I get to talk to somebody in Austin, although we are talking, I don't know where he is, but somewhere around Austin, and I am somewhere around Austin, and I am so happy to welcome to the program a fantastic author, Jack Woodville London, and we have lots of things to talk about because he's an award-winning author, the 2018 gold medal for Book of the Year. And wow, that's fantastic. He's going to tell us more about that. And then a wonderful book, French Letters, Children of a Good War. And we're going to talk about that too. And we're going to talk about his newest book, which is about Texas, which is really helpful to me because I don't know too much about Texas. And here it is, Dangerous Latitudes. So welcome to Joy on Paper, Jack.
Thank you for having me.
Jack Woodville London. What a great name for an author, Jack London. But we have to keep that Woodville in there. So how are you doing?
I think I'm in pretty good shape. If you're in Austin, you know that at the moment we are about to get the Sahara dust storms. The wind will blow completely across the Atlantic and settle in my throat.
I haven't experienced that yet. I'm too new. I didn't know that you got those things here.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that it got cold in Austin. I always thought it was hot all the time. And I was shocked when I arrived and it was 22, we got 22 degrees weather.
You arrived in February.
I came from Florida and
Yeah.
my goodness, we never got 22 degrees. So it was
So
like,
the first time I spent an extended time in Florida, I went to Fort Lauderdale, beaches, ocean, palm trees, beauty. I arrived in early January, went straight to the docks to join a sailboat crew. And that night, as we slept on the boat, Florida had its worst citrus freeze in 100 years, and all of the grapefruit dropped off the trees, all the oranges dropped off the trees like little orange cannonballs. So, like you, I had no idea that it ever froze in Florida.
I think it's sometimes in the central area it does, but boy, not usually. And certainly, I was surprised because when we see cowboy movies, we never see the cowboys freezing. It just so I was surprised. Anyway, your new book, Dangerous Latitudes. It's fascinating. As somebody, my favorite in grade school, my favorite class was geography. Now, they don't have that anymore. They don't teach geography. In fact, most people, I don't know what they teach anymore in school, but I think perhaps certainly when I went, they still had that map at the front of the room on the roller, and the teacher would pull it down. Do you remember those?
Yes.
And I remember when we were in class and the teacher would pull it down, suddenly everybody in the class would sit up and they'd be interested. There's something about geography that is fascinating. So this book is so interesting. And then when I realized you're also talking about espionage, we didn't know there was any espionage in Texas. This is all great stuff. And you got some very nice blurbs for this book. I love from Carlton, and he says, espionage. Be aware. There's a new breed of spy on the literary scene. Award-winning author, London's fast-paced tale, set in the infant days of the Texas Republic, has it all. That is a nice one, isn't it?
Pretty nice one. I have absolutely nothing but gratitude for the Carlton Stowers blurb and for the others. I'm blessed.
It's fantastic. They really have nice things to say to you about you. And I thought it was great. And I love that just as in real life, Jack Woodville London's territory in Dangerous Latitudes is a land of spies, rough frontiersmen, Mexican military figures, Indians, and men seeking opportunity, redemption, or both. Wow. And I guess that they're right. You certainly have woven a wonderful story here.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Maybe first, before we start talking about the book, just tell people a little about yourself because you're a fascinating character yourself. Now, are you originally Texan?
I have lived in Texas my entire life, minus the time I spent in the Army. Yes. I grew up in a town. There are fewer people living in your building in the domain than there are living in my hometown, which is now just about 400 people. It's high in the panhandle of Texas. We had 22 boys and girls in my high school graduating class. 17 of us went on to get college diplomas. So maybe we were the little house on the prairie, starved for reading and education, but it served me well.
Very well, because you landed up going to Oxford and studying in Oxford for a while and other places. So tell us about this. First of all, you joined the military. When was that?
I joined against my will. It was in 1970. I was drafted out of law school.
Against your will, yes, I would say.
Those of us who lived through the 70s and remember any of it remember that in 68 and 69, the Tet Offensive and the follow-up jumped the number of people that they wanted in the Army from around 400,000 to around 700,000. And they just opened up and began to draft everyone, including me. To avoid leaving school immediately, I entered the officers training corps, and they let me serve contemporaneously with the law school and the officers training corps. Then went into the Army, was commissioned an officer in 72, served in lots of places, and was so relieved when they pulled me back from a flight that was bound for Vietnam. I wound up spending the last few months of my military career as a lawyer, and then came back home to Austin and began to work as a lawyer.
When did you start writing?
And the first thing that might be a book was when I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade, and I had become fascinated with boy things, one of which was a red sports car, which was the title of a book. And I wrote my own little short book about a young boy in a very small town who was visiting his local garage one day when a wreck happened on the freeway. I guess we didn't even have freeways, it happened on the highway. And they brought the car in, and this young boy in this small town in this garage worked with that mechanic to put that car back together, and they drove off to have adventures. And they had adventures in Texas and in Mexico and in California. And I spelled every single city wrong except the name of my hometown. If you're talking about a book, it'd be about age, 12 or 13. When I was in law school, I was the managing editor of the International Law Journal. And we published 4 books a year. I wrote some of the articles and stories in them. After that, most of my writing was law-based writing, but it was very particular. I became the person in the Texas bar who worked on the committees to write the rules of evidence and later to write the questions that judges ask juries at the end of trial. And those have to be very efficient and correct and specific to correctly apply the law in the cases. But somewhere along the way, I had gotten to a point in my career where I was ready to start transitioning into what I always wanted to do. And I couldn't decide whether that was to write or to become a historian. And so the answer was to become a writer of historical fiction. I went to school in France. There is a very well-known crime writer named Peter May. He has an academy, or had at that time an academy in France for budding fiction authors, and I attended that for a term. Tried to write 2 books that were utterly unreadable. They were so unreadable that if you threw them against the wall, they would actually fall. They wouldn't even stick. But despite that, I got a literary agent to represent me. And I kept wondering, why would a literary agent represent someone who didn't go to undergrad as a creative writer or work in a literary agency or have any publishing industry ties? It turned out that she made her living by keeping all of the royalties. And so she was indicted and charged with felony theft from the authors. Fortunately, before my first book was ever even sent to a publisher. So I learned a lesson there. And then about 4 years later, I worked with several people here in Austin to help publish my first novel, which became the base novel of a trilogy called the French Letters Trilogy. And I wrote 3 of those trilogy novels over the space of 8 or 9 years. And that wound up with the one you mentioned earlier, French Letters, Children of Good War, a novel that was the 2018 Kirkus Review Best Books of the Year and Book of the Year. You keep working at it.
Well, that's what you have to do as a writer. You have to keep working at it, and you never know what's going to hit and what's going to hit at the right time.
And it's a Beatles problem. You think that if you learn how to play guitar, you'll immediately become a rock star. The Beatles probably put in 10,000 hours playing in Hamburg and playing in the cave and playing everywhere else before they ever had one single hit of any kind. And writing is a lot like that. Most of us are very slow in learning how to write. You can type. I can type really well, but that's not the same as writing. It takes years of work, years of criticism, years of editing, and even then it often doesn't work for any of us. So I've been blessed.
You're great. I think you're great, and I loved. I have Dangerous Latitudes. I've been marking up the the pages.
Good.
So this is a fascinating story. As I said, not knowing other than the Alamo and John Wayne movies, which my dad watched endlessly, and I watched just because I like to be with him. I would sit up next to him and watch every cowboy movie he ever watched. Uh,
Sure.
but I didn't really know a lot about the history. I'm learning so much since I came here. So this and now of course talking about geography and talking about a map. And let's just look for a minute. We're going to talk here. You have a map at the front of your book, and
Yes.
it's simple. There's Texas, there's Mexico, and where the heck were the borders, and how did you get the idea to write a story about this?
This will take a moment if you will bear with me. From my other books, I had not really written a book about the history of Texas at all. And I did not feature myself as a Texas historian. Most of my work has been World War II oriented or has been work that I wrote to teach military members, service members, how to write their own memoirs. But I have a very close knit group of friends, and we were having coffee one morning, and one of them asked if I would like to circumnavigate or drive around the borders of Texas. And mostly I said, no, I would not. It's enormous. And I have probably done most of that at one time or another. I don't know where people watching this will be, but if you're in Texas, we often explain the dimensions by saying El Paso is closer to Los Angeles than it is to Houston. Houston is closer to Miami than it is to El Paso. In the 1830s, there was nothing there. There was one trail that went from the Sabine River at Louisiana to Nacogdoches, all the way across hundreds and hundreds of miles to San Antonio, and then to a little Mexican outpost on the Rio Grande River. The only town was San Antonio. Nacogdoches was the East Texas town of sorts. Galveston was becoming a town on the ocean. There was almost nothing to connect any of them. And if there was anyone who really owned Texas, it was the Native Americans. And so I said, no, I don't think I want to drive around from Amarillo to Texarkana, 300 miles away, to the Gulf of Mexico, hundreds more, to Brownsville, to El Paso and back. And they said, oh, we're not talking about that Texas. We're talking about the one that goes to Wyoming. I stopped. I said, Texas does not go to Wyoming. It ends at New Mexico and Oklahoma. And said, no, we're talking about the Republic of Texas. It used to reach all the way to Oklahoma, to Wyoming. And I said, no, it didn't. And we argued for a while. And finally, I agreed that if I was wrong, I would go on this trip. Whereupon they pulled out an article that quoted the original Texas boundaries, which in fact reached all the way to Wyoming. So I swallowed my pride. We got in the car. We took 2 weeks driving from El Paso to Santa Fe to Taos to the mountains of Colorado into Wyoming, back through Colorado, down the Arkansas River to Dodge City, Kansas, and finally back to Texas. All boundaries that once were within Texas until 1850. And I became fascinated with the idea that a place that had a total population of maybe 50,000 people, the largest city was San Antonio. There was no city anywhere near the Rio Grande River. How it could possibly claim to have boundaries that reached almost to Canada. I then found a map from 1837, 1 year after the Alamo, 1 year after Texas claimed boundaries all the way to Wyoming. And I looked at the map, and those who drew the map, the same people who voted on the boundaries, drew the real boundaries is midway between San Antonio and the Rio Grande. In other words, 1/3 of today's Texas and about 1/15 of the enormous boundaries. And I thought, there's something missing here. I studied the map. I found the Camino Real, the little roads, the dotted lines on the map that connected Louisiana, Texas, and Mexico. The cities of Austin, Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, El Paso, Corpus Christi. None of those cities existed, none of them. There was nothing in the Panhandle. There was nothing in East Texas except Nacogdoches. There was, in fact, by this time, the town of Bastrop. There was the village of Goliad, where Texas had lost one of its 2 worst battles in its fight for independence. But there was nothing else. San Antonio was a remnant of the city. It only had 2,500 people in the year 1797, maybe 5,000 by the year 1836. And I was fascinated how this place could possibly have ever been claimed to be the borders that we have today. That did your high school geography lesson. It made me look at the maps and become fascinated. I then discovered that no one had ever written any historical novels about that era. Most of us believe that Texas emerged from the Alamo and the battles after the Alamo. And then even in school, when you're taught about Texas history, you go to the Alamo, Texas wins independence, then Texas becomes part of the United States, then Texas becomes part of the Confederacy. That skips over about 25 years of what actually happened. And that 25 years was really violent, dangerous, and chaotic. And I thought, who would look at that? Who would ever experience that and have a story to tell?
I can see the minute you realized all of this had never been written about, nobody knew about it. This is for an author, this is like a dream come true.
Oh,
Whoa, yeah, this you must feel great because most of these people nobody knew about. I was in Houston once and they have a Lamar Street, so you hear a few of these names, but you really don't know about so much. And you have just made it into a fascinating story. So tell us how you decided to where you found your main character.
So the book is filled with real people. Sam Houston was the hero who won independence. Mirabeau Lamar was the president who followed Sam Houston. Thomas Rusk and Pinckney Henderson were statesmen who actually represented Texas in England and in France, trying to scrounge up money from other countries to make this place survive the independence. The entire time, Mexico was invading and reinvading, trying to take Texas back. All of these people that are mentioned in the book are real people who actually did what the book says they did when they did it, and I only invented 4 characters. That's all it took. It took someone to go across Texas. Who better than a map maker? It took someone to help him. Who better than a couple of horse thieves? And it took someone with more brains than he had to know what was really going on and to keep him pointed on the right path. And that's the woman I created named Noemi to help walk him through all of these things that really happened. Does he survive? Does Noemi survive?
You have to read the book to discover it. And along the way, it is a wonderful adventure. There are so many things that happen. So you got the idea for the surveyor. And when I think about you actually making the trip later on in a car,
Yeah.
And he didn't have a car. This is a massive. This is to do this trip, to go around and do a map of that dimension is incredible. And somebody did it. Somebody did it, and you really have brought it to life. I love it.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Tell us about your main character. Tell us about how you did it and what you came out with and just the whole process.
I don't want to give the whole story away, but I will talk a little bit about Alexandre LaBranche. First, to bring someone across Texas, they have to have a starting place and an ending place. And in my view, we're better than Louisiana. I say that in part because Texas owes an enormous debt to Louisiana. You probably know enough about the Alamo to know that there were 182 people who defended the Alamo, and every single one of them was killed. Among them was a small group from Louisiana called the New Orleans Grays. The New Orleans Grays were all volunteers. They brought the New Orleans flag to Texas. They lived and died in the Alamo. The Mexican army was very proud to have taken their battle flag and taken it back to Mexico City as a trophy. And I thought it's really both geographically and historically kind to pay homage to the debt that we owe to Louisiana by creating a character who would be somewhat a typical Louisiana plantation dandy who has to go through a lot of growing up to become the person he's destined to become. I needed a person who would have a reason to cross not just into Texas, but across Texas and all the way to Mexico. And who better than someone to make maps for a place that plainly doesn't have very many maps? And who better to be a map maker than someone with a privileged education in Louisiana? His name is Alexandre LaBranche. He's entirely fictitious, but he's not entirely fictitious in that his uncle really was the charge d'affaires for the United States with duties responsible for what then was the Republic of Texas. Why would he go? He needs something to do. How many of us grew up under fathers that we thought we know more than that? And then fathers say, fine, if you know so much, go out into the world and make your own living. And that was a pretty easy character to create. A naive young map maker who thought he knew everything. And it's not his own fault that, as the book turns out, he can't even tell which way the sun comes up in the morning. But he learns. He does learn.
People still don't realize that Texas was a separate country, it was separate from the United States. They had to have liaisons, they had to have ambassadors to Texas. It's really incredible to think about.
It was an independent republic, and for 9 years before it became part of the United States, Mexico refused to agree that Texas had won independence. It literally kept armies on the Rio Grande River, and those armies frequently came right back across invaded San Antonio, invaded the South Texas area that is now Corpus Christi, invaded all the way up almost halfway to Houston. And it's a miracle that Texas survived because it had no money. It had very few people. It had no standing army. In fact, the only thing that probably kept it from becoming captive to Mexico once again is the great distance. It was 120 miles from the Rio Grande River just to San Antonio de Bexar, and probably that same distance to what is now Corpus Christi. And all that's a desert. As you say, there were no cars, there were no trucks. They had to ride horses and carry all of their wagons full of equipment, food, and march men that distance. And it's basically a very hot, boiling desert during combat season. So, yes, those things actually happened. And yes, someone had to go down there and take a look at them. In the meantime, Texas was begging other countries to recognize Texas independence. England, France, and the United States were the three who stepped up first. Texas needed money, and so it sent these men who are in the book to England, to the United States, and to France to beg for recognition and to ask for money. Texas also did some really stupid things, and probably the dumbest thing it did was it sent 300 men, merchants, and a few soldiers overland to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1841. When Texas declared its boundaries, it declared the boundary of the Rio Grande River from its mouth at the Gulf of Mexico to its source. Not a person on earth knew where the source of the Rio Grande River was. Everybody knew that it went up through New Mexico as far as Santa Fe and Taos, and beyond that, no one knew. No one had ever been there. There was no map that showed its location. The few maps that the Spaniards had written petered off after you got up into the area north of Taos. Texas said, no problem, we're going to claim it all the way to the source. And then sent 300 men to go tell Santa Fe, you're now part of Texas. We would like you to cooperate with us while we take over the merchant trade of the Santa Fe Trail. This really happened. I'm always astounded that no one who grew up in Texas seems to remember being taught that as part of Texas history. Among the astounding parts of that Santa Fe expedition is that there was no way to get from Austin to Santa Fe. Crow flies, it's about 700 miles, but there were no roads. There was no way to get to El Paso. There was no road from Austin or San Antonio to that part of the Rio Grande. The city of El Paso did not exist. Nothing existed out there. And on the maps, it was drawn as, quote, range of the Comanches. That was who really owned the land. Texas sent its men overland by wagon due north from Austin, hoping to reach the Canadian River and turn west to go to Santa Fe. There was no road there. No one had ever been there. They got about halfway to the Red River. They were attacked by Indians. They ran out of food. They were resorting to eating snakes and lizards and rabbits and whatever they could catch. And the Indians set prairie fires around them to try and drive them away. By the time these Texans reached New Mexico, the Army of Mexico knew everything they were doing and was sitting there waiting for them, promptly captured all of them without firing a shot, marched them almost to Santa Fe, but not quite, put them in irons, shot a few of them, and listen to this, PatZi, marched the 294 survivors from outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico to the Rio Grande River, south to Mexico City. 1,600 miles overland on foot, and put them in dungeons in a place called Perote Prison.
Wow.
No one remembers any of that history, but it really happened. And that is the history that sets the underlying backstory of this novel. The reason why our hero Alexandre LaBranche left New Mexico to go map Texas all the way to the Rio Grande was not told him. It was to help him find the missing soldiers because they were not heard of. No one in Texas knew what had become of them. And so Lamar says, let's go send this kid out there to find those soldiers, those merchants. And if he finds them, Lamar, will be a hero. And if he doesn't find them, the Mexican army will capture this kid and shoot him, and we won't have to pay him. That's how the book begins.
I like to think of what the French and the British, what did they think about when Pinckney Henderson came to Paris? What did they think about this country?
It's a very interesting set of backstories. At that time, most of England's commerce with the United States was with the southern states to get cotton. England had loaned huge amounts of money to Mexico in the 1810s and 1820s to support Mexico's fight against Spain for independence. Spain and France went through the Napoleonic Wars, and so France winds up being an enemy of Mexico. England winds up being a creditor of Mexico. Neither one of them want the United States to grow all the way to the Pacific Ocean. If you want to talk about geography, imagine that England owned all of Canada and down into what it claimed and as part of the Oregon Territory. South of the Oregon Territory was California, then still part of Mexico. So France opposed Spain. France opposed Mexico. England was a creditor of Mexico, and the United States wanted to expand to the west. In order to do that, someone had to make a credible claim for the territory. They couldn't just steal it from Mexico. And since Texas had the territory and Texas needed the money, each of those three entertained supporting Texas for its own personal gain. Pinckney Henderson wound up in Paris negotiating a treaty of recognition, amity, and commerce, and wound up collecting some money and meeting his wife there. He wound up later meeting Pakenham in England, the British Prime Minister. Both of these resulted in consulates being established abroad. I don't know how well you know the city of London. You can still go find a plaque on the wall about a block from St. James Park in London, site of the Texas consulate, 1836, 1845. But it was really the United States that was the most interesting relation. Most of Texas wanted to be annexed to the United States simply to save it from Mexico. The United States was in turmoil because the northern part of the United States did not want any more slave states. The southern part of the United States wanted more cotton growing land and more slave states for political votes. And England wanted Texas independent so that it could get cotton from England, from Texas, without having to pay tariffs. And it would give it a better bite of the Gulf of Mexico. So all of these little turmoil backstories really took place. And this poor kid gets caught up in all of them.
The opportunity to weave a story around all of this unknown history is such an opportunity. You brought him to life, let's just say. You
Thank you very much.
Where did you find all your information? Did you go to source material at the university?
It took me longer to write this book than it took to get a bachelor's degree. As I said, there is very little out there. There are no fiction books, apart from one that I won't mention, which is not very good. But there is very little out there about that 9-year period. I began with an 1837 Texas map and then went to the academic sources. They began all the way back with the fall of the Alamo, the fall of Gulf, the victory at San Jacinto. I hate to admit it, but a fellow from Texas A&M wrote 3 volumes of history of the Texas Republic that did indeed focus on that period after the Alamo fell. It talks at length about the invasions of San Antonio. I had to go to Spanish language materials to discover things such as the existence of silver mines in the hill country. Then I looked back at the map, and sure enough, guess what? There are silver mines in the hill country. I had to go to both English and Spanish language sources to reconstruct life in San Antonio in 1842 and 1843. The Mexican invasions, the very street where these people lived, the running away from Mexican invasions and the capture of all of their wagon loads of rickety old tables and chairs and what have you. A little battle down by Corpus Christi that produced a man who was actually trading with the enemy. All of these things were either from academic sources or from John Stuart Nance's 3-volume set of Texas history from that period. It's out there. You just have to dig it out.
And you have to have great imagination.
A little imagination comes in handy.
What did you find the most about living conditions? They lived on their horses practically.
When you're not in San Antonio, Nacogdoches, Bastrop, or Galveston, yeah, you're mostly living on your horse. Or for people who were establishing farms and ranches, they lived in these really sad little stockade houses. There were none of these Texas ranch homes. There were none of these wonderful log houses that you see out in developments these days. Most of their homes were little pinion log or cedar log cabins, one room to live in, one room to help keep some of the livestock or the slaves, a little tiny dog run in between. They were constantly in invasion, if not by Mexico, from the Comanches, the Kiowas, the Wacos, the Utes. So living conditions were incredibly brutal. I can't begin to describe what it was like. In 1854 book, A Journey Through Texas on Horseback, describes a man who came to Texas after annexation to assess what it was like in the South for these plantation owners. They didn't have any clothes on. The whites who owned them would live on these plantations of theirs in log huts. Their slaves would live mostly in wearing underclothes, living outside. Trade, there were no highways, there were no rivers. Linville was a town on the Texas coast that was raided by the Comanches who rode from the hill country. I believe the distance is 130 or 40 miles, looted the entire town, captured all of its houses, all of its goods, all of its warehouses, burned the city, and shut down Texas' closest port. Gilead was a very fragile little village where 400 Texans were killed in 1836. To say living conditions is simply to assume something that didn't happen. It was a brutal society.
Between when I saw that it was really cold, and then when I see like it's 100 degrees every day after day, and think about how they lived without AC, I don't know. I think the younger generation would go crazy.
And they managed it by creativity. Spanish tile roofs are curved, and they are curved and overlaid with one another in such a way that they actually draw air underneath those tiles and into the upper part of a room. That's why you see these Mediterranean Spanish tiled roofs. Little wooden porches between the two rooms of a log house draw air between them in sort of an augmentation of natural air conditioning. But they were tough people. They didn't start with air conditioning and then do without. They never had it to begin with. They learned that it was cooler in the shade and a little more breezy, and to keep your trees up, because once you cut your trees down, you exposed yourself to more heat. They were very pragmatic people. They were just trying to stay alive.
This book, the fun read, and people will enjoy the characters, both the real and the ones that you made up, because it's just fun to read. It's an interesting story. You're a great writer, obviously. You certainly to get the book of the year was fantastic. It shows you got talent. And so let's talk a little bit about that. You've got talent because you also have a book out there about writing and tell us about that.
I belong to a group called the Military Writers Society of America. To be a military writer, to join the group, you simply have to either be military or former military or family of former military, or trying to write something to do with the military. So it's a very broad category that people can join, but its purpose was created to give military veterans and their families an outlet to write about their experiences. These men and women come home from deployment and have stories to tell, and many of them have stories to tell that they will not tell anyone. Much of it is bottled up, but almost all of them share one thing. They grew up to become soldiers. They did not grow up to become creative writers. Very few literary agents in the soldier business. Somewhere along the way, it occurred to all of us at the officer level of this group that it would help if we held seminars and writing programs and invited people to come and sit in on those and just learn the basic conventions and devices of creative writing, fiction and nonfiction. Along the way, we began to help literally hundreds of veterans to tell their stories. And along the way of that, I was asked to write a book that would contain very basic level creative writing ideas, little exercises and descriptions and chapters. And so I wrote a book called A Novel Approach to Writing Your First Book. It is the standard work of the Military Writers Society of America. And instead of being on the bestseller list or being praised and giving book reviews, it simply shows up in the libraries of all these men and women who come through our group and want to learn to write. And I'm very proud of it.
And I also encourage veterans not just to write about the bad things or the horrific things that happen to them, but you can write a cookbook, you can write a kid's book, you can write all sorts of, just again, finding that you become very proud of yourself when you see your words on paper. So you might not write a bestseller, but it's a legacy and it's something to be proud of. And that's important. The process of putting words on paper really is so beneficial to the mind.
Very therapeutic.
It really is.
And you never know how getting your own story on paper will relieve a lot of your own memories and your own anxieties, even if no one reads it. Just that you can write a clear statement of what happened to you and what happened to the people with you and how you emerged from that. It's very therapeutic, and you're right, their families will treasure that sometime in the future.
It's very funny. I'm working on a book that's set in the 1870s in India. And
Okay.
I am so thankful for all of the people and many soldiers and also the wives of soldiers who wrote books. And in those days, they could get these published, these memoirs, because there were people who were interested in what was happening. So I have a whole collection of books written by people in India, British people who were in India, writing about the Afghani war at the time. Can you believe it? We have the British were fighting the Afghan war back in the 1860s, 1850s, 18. Nothing changes.
Nothing.
And the soldiers are the ones who have suffered, and I think it is very useful for on so many levels. First, for the person who writes the book, and then for the people who are going to read the book 100 years from now as source material. If you put it on paper, it's just really great. I think Dangerous Latitudes is a great example of what, when you are struck with an idea and you run with it, you run with it.
Don't be afraid of your ideas.
Exactly.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with breathing life into old lessons. Historical fiction is so fun to write because all you have to do is take these extraordinary tales from history that no one's ever thought about and breathe a little life into them. Those were real people. They spoke a little differently than we did. Their clothes were a little different. They didn't have televisions or cars, but they still spoke to one another and they plotted against each other and they did horrible things. And somehow we all emerged from it. Yeah,
We discover a lot about human nature when we're writers.
we really do.
You really do. You look, you see the good, you see the bad, you see the ugly, but you see the redemption, generosity of heart,
Yeah.
great spirit, and inspirational stories.
I'm thrilled that you enjoy the book. Thank you very much.
It's a fun read. One of the nice things when you're a writer, if you're a real writer and you're not AI, you can actually get out there and talk to people, and it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
It is. I really enjoy meeting people and people who have not read the book but wind up at some place where I am and we're talking about books, just learning their stories, listening to their perspective. One of the concerns I have about where we are today is that we don't listen to other people. We don't learn the stories of others. We don't learn why they feel the way they do about things. And a book is a very good way to introduce each other, introduce us to one another.
You're right. It is. It's a great way. This as a perfect gift for a father.
It strikes me that if you love your father, you really ought to buy him a copy of that book.
I do. I think so. I think because it's a kind of book that anybody will. As a woman, I love it, but I think men particularly will get this idea. They will really appreciate the challenge that went into doing this. The story is fascinating. If I'm doing a children's book, I encourage people to send books to children's hospitals. And if you know of a retirement home where people are still reading, not a care facility, but a retirement home, drop one of these books off because there will be people there who will enjoy reading it. And
Subby, thank you.
it's important. We need readers, and we need readers who are reading real books,
Yeah,
and
real book.
that you did a lot of research on this book.
I don't think you can see, but
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we do. That's
yeah,
my oldest guest on my radio program before I started this was 100 years old. She was 100 years old. She celebrated her 100th birthday, an author,
my goodness.
and she had just written a book about cybercrime at the age
You're
of
kidding.
100. At the age of 100,
Wow,
and published by a publisher, a hardback book. So
that's wonderful.
you that's another joy of writing. You can keep going. You just keep going.
You absolutely can. There's no reason why we should put our brains on hold once we hit a certain age.
Exactly. And as a matter of fact, it's better not to, because then if you keep all these gray cells going, you're better off. So
You surely are.
okay, I think I have your webpage here. JWL Books, right?
That's it. That's me. It's a nice site.
Exactly. Yeah, go there. It's Jack Woodville London, and really great name, easy to remember. It's a great read, and thank you so much for joining me today. Working on another book.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't have to. The fact is, once you find the joy on writing, you can't stop. You just can't stop. You just.
I don't intend to. I intend to keep at it.
Okay, so you'll be back here. Okay.
I hope so. I hope you'll have me back.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime. Anytime you feel like talking about writing or about books, join me again here on Joy on Paper. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye now, Jack. Wow, it was so much fun to talk to Jack Woodville London about his book, Dangerous Latitudes. It's a fascinating book, and you will enjoy it. And it is a wonderful gift book because everybody will enjoy learning something about Texas that they didn't know. And it is fascinating. Bye-bye.
subscribe, showcase more great authors.